All right. I'm going to sort of just fix that up. I'm talking with Paul Brosnan, who's an old friend of mine actually, but we've drifted apart. And but what I wanted to talk to you about was some speeches you made in Canberra on Thursday or Friday last week at Brett Dennis's funeral. It's a difficult one to manage. From my understanding, it was a bit of a, well, it was a lot of a reunion from a lot of AAS guys. How did you cope with it all?
Yeah, look, Rob, it just highlighted, as you just opened then, and too much time has passed. And yeah, it was as great as it was to re-familiarise and to reminisce with a lot of old faces and really good friends for a long time. 20 odd years ago, it was just a real shame it was on such circumstances, and obviously, it's really sad also that probably the last time we got together was for a similar occasion when the passing of Damien McDonald 10 years prior. So yeah, look, a lot of mixed feelings, but ultimately profound sadness in the passing of Brett Dennis, who was a really close friend and someone that I admired, and someone that really influenced my progress in the sport of cycling those years ago.
I want everyone to understand that he had he took his own life, but there's no link at all with the sport. That's I don't want anyone to jump to that conclusion. And we've done a lot of sad interviews and talks about mental health lately, and perhaps what I'd like to do with you is just to get to reflect on Brett and his years as a rider, because I wrote a piece after he died stating that without his influence, cycling in Australia would be entirely different to the way that we know it. That's true, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, and you're spot on, Rob. I mean, it's been 20 plus years since Brett raced. Too much time has passed. He has a young family, 2 young adult children, Brianna and Callum, to his wife Kylie. And so he was well and truly in general life by this stage. So, but look, Brett as a cycling pioneer in Australian cycling was such a laid back character and a super talent. And he was somebody that you didn't really quite expect the performances he delivered with the way he approached them. He'd be asleep in a van prior to the start. He'd be last to sign on for those races, but he was super talented, and when he put his mind to a job, he was incredibly successful. And so, in terms of his inspiration and influence in Australian cycling, I mean, anyone that has been a team member of or with Brett will attest the same, and that was he was a great fun guy to be in a team with, and really quite motivating in his own calm way. One thing that he really stood up for and stood strongly for was inclusiveness. He never liked to see somebody not being included, or if he felt someone was getting the raw end of the stick, he'd bring them into the conversation or stand up for them. He was a real team player, and probably his performances could have been greater had he not been so selfless.
Just let's talk through those early, let's say the Salzwedel years. That's in effect what they were. Heiko had a big influence on making road cycling more prominent, certainly as a sport in Australia. We've heard from Robbie McEwen and Hank Vogels over the years, they've been relaying their experience. How was it for you, and how does life morph once you become an administrator?
Yeah, look, Heiko, actually, the road program started, correct me, in 91, 92. So I didn't come on scholarship with the road program until the end of 93. I'd previously come from Charlie Walsh's track program for a year in 93. But those early years were very much the shaping of what Australian cycling is today. Heiko's involvement and vision for Australian road cycling has come about these days through the time and the ideas that he had years ago with the formation of the giant AIS professional team, albeit a Division 2 team. It was a small team with a small amount of funding. It was quite successful, and some super talented, successful professional athletes in the likes of Hank Vogels, Robbie McEwen, Pat Yonker, Darren Smith, Brett Dennis, etc. did go on, or had the promise to go on to very successful professional careers.
Yeah. I referenced some innovation that Heiko had introduced, that he engineered an 11 tooth before Shimano had created that, for example. Can you remember any, and Andrew Logans was at pains to remind me that Heiko was the first cycling person he knew to introduce radios, or two-way radio communication. Can you think of any other innovations?
Oh, look, those two do stand out. And they were all around the time trial, and back then it was the team time trial, the 100-kilometre team time trial. So it was a way to communicate with the riders, but also the 11 tooth was to get a bigger gear for the team, because for the speeds they were travelling at. Look, I think the general innovation and the really simple one that Heiko brought was the vision to actually introduce an Australian team to world cycling, and actually having a group of Australians competing on the world stage. And so, look, again, the specifics back there, it was pretty raw, and there wasn't a lot of funding, but it was probably his implementation of a season-long race program to develop Australians and put them in front of the world stage, which then in time brought interest in sponsorship, and obviously the Australian cycling's grown from there. And obviously, he's through the scholarship years, there are quite a number of riders that were on under Heiko's wing that went on to professional careers and put Australian cycling on the map.
Your career came to an end because of a horrific accident. Can you just paraphrase what happened with you? You broke your leg in a terrible way.
Yeah, look, I had a hit by a car head-on at a training camp in South Africa in February 1994. We were actually doing individual time trial efforts. Back then it was Hank Vogels, Damien McDonald, Brett Dennis, Dean Jones and myself, yeah, it was just an unfortunate wrong place, right time, or wrong time. To say that it ended my cycling career isn't entirely true. I did have, although I had a full year out with rehabilitation, and it's subjective as to whether or not I returned to what I was capable of. It certainly put a big dent in my aspirations, but I did compete for a couple of years afterwards.
Yeah. And since you've been involved with administration, ever since stopping racing, really? Yeah,
so when I stopped racing in mid-97, I became involved in sports administration through the Australian Institute of Sport. I've had various roles. I haven't worked in cycling for that whole time, but I've always had a link. Yeah, but generally sports administration of the roles have all been linked to.
So we started talking about Heiko, and we're here today to basically everyone gather around to meet Simon Jones and understand his vision. They've sort of had parallel lives, I guess. Simon's a little younger than Heiko, but they're both innovators. You've had 6 months now with Simon. Give us a little bit of feedback on how you think he's managing in the office. How's the vibe?
Look, really optimistic, and I think there's a really good energy and a team building. And so Simon's unashamedly being very focused on performance, but also building the team around that performance, so that we're upskilled and have the resources to support and deliver the performances and aspirations for Olympic gold medals come Tokyo. So look, Simon's still, it's been 6 months, but because there is so much change, we're still not complete in that transition. It probably won't be until the early new year, or even until after the Commonwealth Games, before we're a complete new unit to align with the strategy. But definitely there's lots of optimism, lots of positivity. There's been a real focus of Simon's is certainly really trying to build a closer connection with the athletes, having them more involved and part of the decision making. So I think, look, all in all, really positive. Sure, there's some disruption and change can be uncomfortable, but certainly for the most part, it's really quite positive.
If you drew some parallels with your early years, then watching the halcyon times around 2011, where is cycling at in your appraisal?
Oh, look, I think cycling as a sport globally has boomed. I think obviously cycling in Australia is far more prominent in terms of its people's awareness and general interest in the sport. Unfortunately, though, we've still got to close the gap and the link with the commercial interests that do support and underpin the sport to grow bigger in Australia. There's lots and lots of cyclists, 4 million odd, that ride a bike, but only a very small percentage members of a club. And so the next step in the game to be made is how do we bring more people aligned to clubs, whether that be for recreational riding, family riding, or competition. But certainly to try and build a greater membership base is obviously got a big step that needs to be taken yet.
Okay, so sell Cycling Australia to me. Why would I become a member? My 2 kids are, but I'm not.
Yeah, look. I think for the most part right now it is linked to the insurance that we do provide. But this is the next step. And look, what I will say is I work in high performance. I'm not close enough to the governance and to the membership of Australian Cycling to really accurately comment. There are lots of initiatives and terrific ideas that are being discussed and are yet to be implemented by Cycling Australia. So what I would say is there's reason to be optimistic, and I think there's some good opportunities ahead.
I have my theories, but does high performance grow the member base?
Look, I think it has the potential to. I think absolutely the success of Australian cycling, particularly at the Olympic Games, consistently can have a really strong influence on people's awareness and desire and interest to be part of the organisation, to be a member of a sport that is successful. So I certainly do draw a parallel that if Australian cycling can be successful at the Tokyo Olympics and beyond, it puts us in a better footing to build and grow the membership for certain.
You work here at the track. It's your office.
Yeah.
In the catacombs. Do you find just looking at the boards, does that lure you in? Are you going to come back?
No, look, I love cycling, and I am really fortunate to work in the sport because it is my passion. It has been for a long time, and I really do get a buzz still to work around really motivated and performance focused people. And to answer the question directly, no. I'm now in my early 40s. I love to ride my bike. I don't get on it enough. I have a young family, but I do commute as frequently as possible.
If you consider all of the cycling you've seen since you stepped off as a competitor, if you started again now and you've had a taste of everything across the spectrum, so you've done BMX and mountain bike and you've seen it all evolve, if you were new to cycling now, what would you do?
Look, it depends if you wanted to be a competitor or a participant. I think the Grand Fondos and the Amy rides, the bunch and the big bunch community rides, I think they're a terrific initiative and they're things that will grow for the sport. And possibly, I mean, the touring, going to the major grand tours and riding just as a tourist, that interests me now. But if I was to go back to my youth, look, I still would have had a passion to be a professional and ride the Tour de France. It's for me, and I think for many endurance athletes that ride a bike, it's hard not to be lured by the mystique and the glamour and the challenge.
Thanks for having a chat. We could go on longer, but we'll knock it on the head, and I'll just say thanks very much for your time.
Pleasure, Rob.